Greetings, beloved Star Child Rising. You are in Christina's Corner, and I'm Christina. Welcome back to the podcast where I have the opportunity and the honor to highlight and celebrate individuals who are out here leveraging their gifts and their talents to make a positive impact on the world. And today, we have a truly remarkable guest joining us whose work has consistently brought vital truths to light and held power accountable across continents. Kevin G. Hall is an internationally recognized investigative journalist, currently serving as the North America editor for the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP. For decades, Kevin has been at the forefront of uncovering hidden realities, from the deep roots of the 2008 financial crisis to modern day slavery in the Amazon. He's a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, sharing the prestigious award for his groundbreaking work on the Panama Papers and again for his team's coverage of the tragic Surfside condo collapse. His investigations have taken him from the Amazon rainforest, where he traced the global supply chain of illicit labor, to the heart of Washington, D.C., exposing complex economic and political hidden narratives. He's a master of connecting the dots, revealing the intricate networks behind some of the world's most significant stories. Kevin's work embodies the power of tenacious journalism to drive transparency and justice. He's fluent in both Spanish and Portuguese, a former president of the Society for Advancing Business Editing and Writing, and brings an unparalleled depth of insight into white-collar crime, international affairs, and the often unseen forces shaping our world. Kevin, my friend from, as we say, back in the day, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show. Welcome, Kevin.
It's great to be with you, and thanks for the very kind introduction.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to see you. It's actually been years since we've had
Decade.
an opportunity, decades, yes, to talk. But once I started this show, I knew I was going to put you on the list to have a conversation because I follow you on social media and all. And I know you've been really engaged in what's happening in the world today. And I appreciate you for that. So, Kevin, on the podcast, what I do is I ask six questions, and I always start or always ask the guest to take us back to the beginning. So you and I met while attending Oglethorpe University, let's just say many years ago. And I remember when you and a few others, like Laura and maybe Rod, started the Council for Concerned Students. So I know your passion went at least that far back. But can you take us back to your childhood? What were you like as a kid? And did you get any clues about the type of impact that you would want to have on our world?
Well, there's a famous saying that gets attributed to Freud that the child is the father of the man. And I
Hmm.
don't know if that was really his saying or not, but clearly our childhood influences pretty heavily, who we become. And in my case, I grew up in a broken home where my father left early, but was in Latin America. He was from the country of Uruguay and he lived in Ecuador. So I went back
Mm.
and forth as a kid between Ecuador and Miami. And so from a very early age, I was traveling on my own, taking my brother with, in charge of my brother, getting, across three countries to a fourth country and stuff like that. So I kind of had been in that atmosphere, from childhood. But also when you grew up in the 1970s and 60s and 70s in that atmosphere, you understood that the world was more than shopping malls and movie theaters. I mean, you saw, kids with no legs begging in front of the soccer
Mm.
stadium, going door to door to houses. You saw, you know, the reality of what most of the world is. So I think that kind of formed a strong impression on me all the time. And I think the injustice of so many of the Latin countries. You have to do what I do. You have to have kind of an intolerance for injustice, and that was formed pretty early.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that. I never knew about your history.
Yeah,
We talked about a lot of things that were going on in the world, and I remember that you were a big Dylan fan. You
still
still, yeah.
am.
Yeah, I was talking to my daughter about that. She's a huge Dylan fan too, when she was asking who I was going to be talking to today.
But actually,
Um,
that's the thing that kind of changed my life. So I was after Oglethorpe, I had dated a German woman, and we went back overseas to Germany together. And I didn't have any student debt, and I realized the world's kind of right there in front of me. So I bought a guitar, and I in
mhm,
Munich for $25. And this was before the euro and before the EU, so you could only really do this in 2 or 3 countries to sing for your dinner because Paris and Germany worked, but Spain and Italy, the currencies were so weak you'd have to sing for
mhm.
5 hours just to buy a loaf of bread. But I sang Dylan on street corners for a couple of years, made a living as a Bob Dylan busker, for lack of a better term. So he ended up changing my life in more ways than one, and I realized I was going to become a professional bum, or I'd have to find a way to get paid to travel the world. And the only thing I could think of was to be a journalist. And that's how
Mhm.
I kind of backed into
Wow.
journalism. I
Wow.
studied psychology. I'd worked 6 months with schizophrenics in Atlanta and realized they weren't going to get better. I was going to stay poor. And this was kind of a lose lose proposition. It takes a special person to be able to care
Yeah.
for that kind of person. And that wasn't me. And it was
Mhm.
pretty clear. So yeah, so Bob Dylan and music kind of took me around the world and then took me into the profession I eventually landed in.
Mhm. That's great. And you're still able, we'll talk about that later, but you still keep music as part of your life. So,
Oh yes, Central. Yep.
okay, let's go to number two. Back in 2004, you won the Sigma Delta Chi Award for Best Foreign Correspondence for your investigation into modern day slavery in the Amazon. This was incredibly impactful work tracing the fruits of forced labor into the U.S. supply chain. Can you share a pivotal moment from that investigation that profoundly affected you?
Oh gosh, there were so many, so many.
I can
So
imagine.
that whole project started, and I guess I should, with the caveat that I'm kind of the last of the Mohicans. So I was kind of the last correspondent before the crisis hit our industry. Um, the last guy who had a budget, who could travel, who had a fixed, I had something around 150,000, which back then went a much further than it would today. I had
Hmm.
a budget for an office and staff in various countries, and I traveled the region. And I was there at a time I was based in Brazil and was almost never there. I used to joke, I just have a family here. I don't actually live here because you had the return of Pinochet to Chile. You had the 5 presidents in Argentina and 5 presidents in a week. You had the collapse of Argentina in
Hmm.
2000, the return of Pinochet in 2001, stand trial for the human rights violations. You had the collapse of Fujimori in Peru collapsed. And then you had multiple coups in Bolivia and Paraguay. And then you had the arrival of the left in Brazil with Lula, who's now in power again. So it was a period of it was the most active period in Latin America since the dirty wars of the early 1980s, and a lot safer, thankfully. So it was just an absolutely crazy time to be there with so much happening all over the region and so much change. So it wasn't until my last year in Brazil that I really got to do the kind of stories that I wanted to do in Brazil, which was the jungle. And it started accidentally, where there were some labor investigators who were killed investigating a farm. And so we thought, that's interesting. Why don't we go up there? So I grabbed a photographer who I worked with, and the two of us went up there, and we had arranged to go along with investigators to highlight the risks of these people who were trying to um, look into what they call in Portuguese, it's condições análogas à escravidão. It's conditions analogous to slavery. That's their
Mm.
terminology for modern slavery. And as we started, the first place we went to with them, we arrived at like 7 in the morning and in front of this big fazenda ranch. And there was a guy with his head bashed in. He was fresh dead right in
Oh.
front of the gates. And that was kind of like a signpost, like this is something bigger than
Mm-hmm.
we realized pretty quickly it was bigger than just a story about some labor investigators, that it was a bigger thing. And my editors back in DC, John Walcott, who is famous for the Middle East correspondent in Newsweek and Time, and a great mentor, he saw it as I did, that this was a much bigger story. And then for an entire year, they said, you're not going to write about politics, you're not going to cover the region, you're going to do nothing but this story. So for a year, I was in and out of the multiple places across the Amazon, Santarém, Pará, Manaus, throughout. And we started, the idea was to trace it from not just the products that went through the food chain, but the people. So the people who were getting, what was happening in the jungle is people were being tricked into going to clear land. And then sometimes they just weren't paid and they were held like 2 or 3 years as slaves. Other times they were shot and buried in a mass grave. They were
Mm.
disposable people. They were just, not even assets. They were just disposable tools, for lack of a better term. So these people came from the states, the poorest states of Brazil, Piauí and Maranhão. And so we started the story in those places. And we went to the homes of these people and got to know people who had lost contact with loved ones there. And then we found out the names of the people who were recruiting. And so we were able to follow them then into these places in the jungle. And then the story took a different turn. But, there are certain things, certain stories you feel like you got the wind behind your back. You have some sort of spiritual connection, some sort of, I always do a little prayer on stories like this saying, use me for good. And that's what this story, at every turn, something
Wow.
something happened that
Mm-hmm.
kind of helped move this story along. And we were at points where we had, in the state of Mato Grosso, which was the soybean capital of the country at this point, we got caught in a standoff between state police and federal police, and each of them had their automatic weapons pointed at each other. And my photographer and I are kind of like in the middle. Hey guys, wait a minute, time out. Uh, we were on bridges that collapsed right after we went over them. And it was like a movie. I mean, just everything that could have happened in this year of going in and out. And there were two things that were particularly impactful in my personal life. One was, there was only one airline that jumped across the Amazon in Brazil. And about a month and a half when I was done with the reporting, was now in the writing phase and was done going to the jungle, the plane crashed on landing in
Wow.
a rainstorm outside of Manaus, and pilot, crew, all the people that I had flown with for the past year all perished.
Wow.
So that was pretty intense to think there, but for the grace of God, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so that was one part of it. And then one of the interesting parts in retrospect when you talk about guardian angels.
Mm-hmm.
So before the trip started, I had bought a pair. I'd gone to an Army Navy store in Rio, and I bought a pair of fatigues, thinking, these would be good in the jungle. And I didn't pay attention to the color. I didn't think much about the color. They were gray and charcoal. My photographer, when I put them on the first day in the jungle, was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean we don't do it? What the hell are you doing? We were in." And he dressed me down. He said, "You're an idiot. Nobody's going to talk to us. You think you're a cop. Why are they going to think I'm a cop? Because those are the colors of the federal police." I said,
Mm.
"Oh God, you're right. Jeez." So I didn't really wear the pants for most of the trip for that reason, because you don't want people to think you're a cop in the middle of the jungle. The one day that I wore them, one day, we were on the Xingu River, uh, probably 3 days from the nearest town, and we were staying at reservations, indigenous reservations in the jungle, in the Kaipaus. And we went down a little tributary called we only know this because they had a handwritten sign on it, called the Riozinho de Afrisio. It's like Little River of Anfrisio. So we went up the river, and they were clearing. We had been told that what they were doing was burning people off their land, sometimes alive, sometimes letting them go, sometimes killing them, but they were taking their land and burning it for soybeans. So we pull in, we're getting to the mouth of this little Rio Zeno, and I'm standing up there with my fatigues on, and they see me and they think we're cops. They throw down their guns and they run into the jungle. And we pick up the guns and seize the guns and keep them with us. You don't think much about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, 3 years ago, Dom Phillips, a reporter, a British reporter, based in Rio, and friends with most of the people that I know who still stayed and reported there, or people who went in after me. He was in the same area on the Xingu River, pretty close to where I was, and he never made it back. He and his partner, who was his translator slash partner, were both murdered. And so his widow was just in Washington 2 weeks ago to announce they launched a book called How to Save the Amazon, which the book he was working on when he was killed, his friends and other reporters finished the book for him and then published it, post-mortem to draw attention. So, you know, talk about feeling like a guardian angel. I mean, that very easily, had I been wearing blue jeans that day, they could have put a bullet in us and nobody would know where we were, where to
Right.
find us. This was
Right.
pre-satellite. We didn't have satellite technology. We didn't have Starlink to kind of check in with the office or anything like that. So it was
Mm-hmm.
there, but for the grace of God. But that story, the lives of these people. So one of the things that happened is in the aftermath of that, they created a reserve, a wildlife reserve, where soybeans were banned. And for about a decade, that held. But when Bolsonaro, the right wing president, came in, and he was kind of like Trump, erasing all regulations and undoing everything, the presumption is that area is back under soybean siege now. But they were people were literally being burned alive on their land for soybeans. And Cargill was the company that was basically giving. They were doing tithing. Here's your bag. Just give us 10% of your output. I can't remember what the number was, but they gave the seed in exchange for a certain percentage of the crop. And so when we wrote that, uh, when I was back in the United States, now working in Washington, I went to a conference in Minnesota, and it turned out that the head of Cargill was speaking, and someone asked him a question about the story. And I wasn't gonna. I don't. I'm a firm believer of reporters not being the news themselves, so I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going to ask him a question. Somebody else asked it, and he said, "Well, let me tell you something. That reporter made that stuff up. He wasn't within 150 miles of our operations." And I was like, "What?" So I said, "Sorry, I don't like to be the news, but I beg to differ." I said, "I visited your plant in Santarem. This is the name of the manager. I can give you his phone number if you'd like it, and we can check this together." And basically caught him in a bald-faced lie. His guy gave me the tour around the place. None of it was made up. I was there. So, you know,
Mm.
again, everything about this story felt like you had the universal good kind of pushing you in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was fortunate enough to win the Society of Professional Journalists, the Foreign Correspondent Award that year. It's the same year of Abu Ghraib, and the horrible things that happened in
Mm-hmm.
Abu Ghraib in
Mm-hmm.
Iraq. So that made it doubly good, knowing that it happened in a very strong news year as well. People saw the value of that kind of reporting. So
Wow. Wow,
so
Kevin, that's
very
just
feel very blessed.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
A couple things came to mind besides I could think of like six other shows we could do together based upon just your answer to number two. And then it puts in perspective, like what are our daily worries,
Yeah. I mean, most of the
what's
world buying a
you know
dollar
what
a
I'm
day.
saying?
It's yeah, it's humbling when you're outside, and in my
Yeah,
current organization, I'm working with people around the world who are literally in hiding because they're going to be arrested or killed.
yeah,
It's some
yeah,
serious stuff. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Wow, thank you for sharing that. All right, let's go to number three. I think I'm ready. You've been a lead reporter or editor on multiple Pulitzer Prize winning and finalist teams, including the Panama Papers and the FinCEN files. These investigations require immense collaboration and meticulous dot connecting to expose complex financial crimes. So, what are some of the more challenging or surprising discoveries you made during these projects?
Well,
Scared to ask.
yeah, there's a lot of interesting things, and made some enemies along the way. We wrote about a guy named Benjamin Wei, WEI, who was kind of charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission with fraud, and he took umbrage to us writing about him. So he had a web page devoted to me that had pictures of me and Denny Hastert, the disgraced speaker who admitted to having a problem with young boys, and he said that we were together. We worked together in that business, and then he had pictures of me and Bin Laden. Said that I'm actually Bin Laden. so,
Wow.
so that was kind of funny.
Mhm.
But in all seriousness, the Panama Papers was groundbreaking in that it led to my eventually joining OCCRP. It changed the model of journalism, right? For the longest time, journalism has been kind of a lone wolf thing. You want to have the scoop, you want to get the glory of breaking the news. Well, this isn't that. This is the opposite of that. We can only put out a giant project if we all work together, and we take pieces of this and we work together. So we did a great piece last year, a big investigation in Dubai about all the dirty money in Dubai. I was so proud of that work because all our colleagues around the world, everybody contributed parts of that. And the same thing with the Panama Papers. We had in the Panama Papers the International Consortium for Investigative Journalism, journalists, ICIJ. The lead on that, I was at the Miami Herald, and they brought me in as kind of the U.S. lead. So it was just being the good fortune of being at the right place at the right time. I had a really strong partner, Marissa Taylor, who's now at Reuters, and she just won the Pulitzer for her work on Elon Musk. So the two of us were kind of sequestered off for
Wow.
14 months away from everybody. We had the information off of servers, so you couldn't hack it from over. You couldn't get at it by hacking or whatever. We had a protected space. Nobody knew what we were working on. It was secret for 14 months, and it's the simplest way of describing it is you kiss a lot of frogs to get to the prince. There's no shortcut. You have to read just reams and reams of documents. And Panama Papers was about 1.7 terabytes of data, and
Wow.
you would have had to have uh, you would have had to have lived more than one life to read every document. Today, to give you a sense of how things have changed, leaks are more common, and access to data and size. We have one of our bigger leaks we're working on right now is more than 13 terabytes. So it's, you know, in many multiples of the Panama
Mhm.
Papers. And so the collaborative model is great because you form relationships with reporters around the world, and it goes well beyond that particular project. You now have people all around you can call on if you need help with something. I'm looking at an extremist, American extremist who's overseas. Well, now I can call on a Swedish partner. Or I can talk to one of our Finnish partners, and
Mhm.
you have the ability to connect with people. And our motto at OCCRP is it takes a network to fight a network, and I really believe that to my core. I mean, you have to build these networks of people who can then investigate. So the other importance of the Panama Papers, and I was fortunate enough to make a documentary with Alex Winter, who was famous for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He was Keanu
Mhm.
Reeves' partner. He's actually a filmmaker as well, and he does very good documentaries. And he contacted us and I was able to work with him closely to develop this Panama Papers documentary. I don't get any money for it, but I highly recommend people watching it. He saw the forest through the trees. He saw things that we collectively didn't see. So he really did a good job with the documentary. And in the documentary, one of the things I say is the thing about the Panama Papers is it showed you that everything you thought was happening behind closed doors was happening. Here's the proof of it.
Wow.
And I think back to that SNL skit that Eddie Murphy used to do when he dressed like a white guy on the bus, and then, when you get off the bus, people would say one thing, and you know that same thing, that this when you get to peer in on these people, and there were, again, 14 months of reading emails and documents. You get to know all these people became real people to you because you read so many of their emails. You kind of got their personalities, and
Hmm.
it was interesting in that aspect. I've since been able to meet a couple of them, which was interesting because you kind of felt like you know them when you finally meet them after reading, unfortunately, reading years and years of their emails, which is kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, but the Panama Papers, you know, showed that what was happening, and then there were subsequent leaks: the Paradise Papers, Pandora Papers, the FinCEN files. Excuse me, and what they've all shown is that Mossack Fonseca in Panama wasn't the dirty shirt, wasn't the exception or the outlier. That
Hmm.
this is the offshore
Hmm.
business. This
Hmm.
is the world out there. And one of the
Hmm.
most troubling things about the Trump administration is that they're rolling back the Corporate Transparency Act. It took almost a decade after the Panama Papers to push what they call beneficial ownership rules so that people would know who's behind the shell company. And now they're pushing that back, and they say we're only going to require this of foreigners, not of anybody else. Well, you don't think Americans can be bad guys? We found quite a few of those guys, right? So,
Right.
and the sad truth is they're always going to build a better mousetrap. There's a lot of money at stake, and the bad guys, will find a way to build a better mousetrap, which they're doing. Unfortunately, that's crypto.
Yeah. That's amazing. A lot of things that people, can speculate about that's going on right now is probably going on. And I can think of some things like I thought about, with this administration. Like, I wonder if it seems like it probably was.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean,
Well, we're
but
in a time where the guardrails are off. I mean, the thought that a president's kids would go out and launch a mobile service using his name and the number of his presidency and say, "Oh, but I have
Mhm.
nothing to do with that," and people are okay with that,
Yeah, yeah,
profiting at everyone else's expense. It's just
yeah, yeah.
strange times.
It is. Yep. All right. Thank you for sharing. Okay, number four. So your work involves exposing immensely challenging and often dark truths about white collar crime and corruption, bringing you into contact with powerful forces that would prefer to remain hidden. How do you approach building trust, gaining access, and ensuring your safety in these investigations? No, we already know you have a guardian angel.
Well, in my case, I'm not, in my current capacity, I'm not that much at risk. I mean, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
something could always happen. Someone could take a grudge or whatever, but it's really my colleagues who are much more at risk. So we have to do lots of things to be careful. Our people in Mexico, our people in Colombia, our people in most of the stands in Kazakhstan. We've got a number of our Kloop is one of our partners in Kyrgyzstan, and almost the entire newsroom has been arrested. A number of our colleagues in Azerbaijan were arrested. Um, and unfortunately, we're going to see more of this. One of the things that happened with this dismantling of USAID is USAID had partially funded us. We weren't nearly completely funded in any way, but they were partial funders of us because they saw value in standing up investigative journalism in places where there's a lot of graft, right? The Balkans and Africa. So one of the big hits caused by this shrinking of USAID and canceling of the contracts was our Africa coverage. We were
Mm-hmm.
starting to build out coverage, and think about how short-sighted this is. Irrespective of how you feel about the humanitarian aspect of
Mm-hmm.
all the needs in Africa, if you want to just look at it from a cold-hearted national security perspective, rare earth minerals, uh, stuff that China has been dominating that we need. you're going to pull out AID, you're going to get rid of any support there, and you're just ceding the entire territory to somebody else because you have no presence there.
Mhm.
It's asinine. You just
Mhm.
don't. The world doesn't work this way, and you know, there are going to be consequences for a long time over this cutback of AID. But going back to the original question of how do you work with sources and safety and those things, we as an organization, we had a big meeting today. We have constant updates and training and reminders of whether it's digital security and how you keep your information safe to physical safety and do you have alarms at home? How do you change your routines? Think back to Ambassador John Bolton, the former Trump advisor and former longtime conservative hawk, was very nearly killed by an Iranian assassination plot in the United States because he walked every day at a park at the same time on his own with nobody else around. Your security, personal security is your responsibility, not the government's. And if you're someone like him, you should be taking those kind of steps. And in our case, we take steps. So, we're all very conscious of where we are and those things. And when we're actually out and reporting, even more so. So we take lots of steps. We have strong security teams. We have encrypted technologies. We communicate encrypted. We use Signal with disappearing messages. You do all kinds of things to protect the integrity of information and yourself. Um, Ultimately, as we saw, unfortunately, in Minnesota, somebody who's crazy enough, usually people who are crazy enough to do something are crazy enough to get caught, but they're the occasional guys that succeed. And unfortunately, what happened
Yeah.
in Minnesota was a reminder that it happened to be politicians, but the same happens to journalists. The reporter in Las Vegas was murdered a couple of years back by one of the people he wrote about, an
Mhm.
investigative reporter. So very real things. And all of us who write about extremism and stuff like that, extremists is another concern. I've written a lot about the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and stuff like that. And, most of us are pretty public people. We're not hard to find if somebody was dumb enough to try to do something. Thankfully, most people aren't, but it's a real possibility.
Okay.
Sorry to be a downer here.
Yeah. I was thinking, is it, we can talk about this later, but from the information that we've been talking about, I'm wondering if it's okay for me to post this interview so my listeners can hear it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. I had cleared this with our people first. That's why when I told you I wanted to run it by because
Okay.
make sure everybody's cool with it. Yeah, I mean I'm not giving away
Okay.
trade secrets. I think
Yeah.
most people know.
Right. Yep. Yep.
And this was the
Or
stuff.
suspect. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Number 5, looking at the current global landscape, what are some of the most pressing forms of organized crime or corruption that you and your team at OCCRP are currently focused on?
So we spend a lot of time, you know, our bread and butter has always been, so-called oligarchs, because we started in the Balkans and we focused heavily on former Soviet republics. That has kind of been our strong suit and then we've expanded from there. So when we talk about organized crime, we're often talking about, in the case of Russia, we're talking about Putin and his network,
Mhm.
the GRU and the FSB. And without getting into great details, they have attacked our people. And I'm good friends with Christo Grazev. If you've seen the movie Navalny, the CNN movie that won the Oscar, that movie chronicles his catching the guys who tried to poison Navalny, the opposition leader in Russia. So, a lot of our time is looking at those kind of networks, those kind of people who traffic in disinformation, who are trying to get, fund the Spanish breakaway republics to, see discontent. Um, that's a lot of our focus. In the Americas, we focus on more traditional organized crime, which is drug cartels. So we did
Mm-hmm.
the Narco Files series in 2023. That was 5.7 terabytes of data from the Colombian prosecutor's office. So reading a lot and a lot of Colombian documents to piece together things here in the U.S. Um, so those two regions. One of the harder ones that we all struggle with is China. So I think we're all hunting for good Mandarin speaking reporters, young reporters who can help because understanding beyond the cultural differences, there are linguistic differences between the
Mm-hmm.
anglicized names and the actual Chinese letters. And trying to find out who really is behind these, we spend a lot of time on that. And we have very good people on staff, but it's always a challenge. So Chinese organized crime is involved, whether it's fentanyl trading, whether it's what they call pig butchering, where people think they're talking to someone they've fallen in love with, and they give them $30,000 to for something, and those pig
What do you
butchering.
call that?
It's called pig butchering. It's a
Oh, okay.
it's we didn't name it. I think the Secret Service named it that. I think they may have been the original names for it. Um, but it's these scams, whether it's an example of a pig butchering scam would be like you get an email and it says you've been hacked. Call Microsoft immediately, and
Mm-hmm.
they think they're calling Microsoft, and it's usually older people who fall for it, and Microsoft, we need to take your bank account, and somebody at the bank may be working with them, so we're going to put all this into cryptocurrency just to safekeep it.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be amazed at how much money lost. We did a big story last year on these crypto ATMs that are at gas stations and mostly in poor areas, curiously enough. Um, and there's just there's so many facets of organized crime, whether it's that sort of stuff, the financial crimes. I wasn't part of it. We did a great series recently out of the country of Georgia on these financial scams that were going after European retirees and just bled them dry. It was just and these were high pressure operations where they're portraying they're claiming to be people looking out for their best interests and just robbing them blind. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that, but cartels, a big part of it. In the U.S., it's more. We occasionally look at Ndrangheta, which is the big Italian mafia right now. Um, one of the things that's unique in the United States is what we call corruption in other countries is actually legal here, and that's been one of my challenges. That how do you write about something if it's not considered corruption in the eyes of the law? Right. So think about all these things, whether it's donating money to a nonprofit, a C4, where they don't have to disclose their donors, and then that money then is used to support something that you're advocating, whether it's a political
Mm-hmm.
position. It can be you might want to have better relations with Romania, so you give to a C4. Foreigners aren't technically allowed, but nobody's looking in on this. And,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of what we would call corruption in other countries is perfectly legal here. And, we are shifting so many of our resources away from white collar crime because it's more convenient to look at immigration and to look at, street level crime, when in fact, we're not funding the positions for the real crime and all that, dirty money going into real estate, dirty money going into luxury yachts. You can almost throw a stone in Miami and hit three grifters involved in something illegal. I haven't spent much of my life working in Miami, so it's a mix of those things. But it's the important thing is to be conscious of it and know that. Think about where things come from, and for instance, think about human trafficking. Porn is kind of ubiquitous. It's everywhere now online, and kids are growing up, with it at their fingertips on a phone, and nobody makes that connection with human trafficking and
Mm-hmm.
kidnapping and things like that are part of that industry, and
Mm-hmm.
where that money goes, and the Caribbean banks and those tied to criminal networks in Russia. These things are all very, very interconnected, and that's kind of our job at where we work to make those connections.
Wow. Have you, do you journal or are you working or thinking about authoring,
I
a
uh,
book?
I have on several occasions lamented the fact that I didn't do a better job of that. One of the things that I had very curious before I left McClatchy Miami Herald is let me pause here. Are you able to edit this because the barking dog out of here, or we have to live
Yeah,
with it?
I
Uh,
love dogs
yeah,
barking.
we're supposed to
That's
be.
fine. Yeah.
But I had the being the most for a decade. I was the chief economics correspondent for the McClatchy newspaper chain, so that's where I did all the work on the Wall Street stuff. And one of the things I guess that because of all that, when the company went bankrupt, they chose me to be the person who wrote about our own bankruptcy, which was
Mm.
like an out of body experience because you're
Oh,
writing for the
yeah.
general public, but you're writing for your colleagues all around the country as well.
Yeah.
And so one of the stranger things I've had to deal with was covering my own company's bankruptcy, and
Hmm.
then you get to see, unfortunately, where the real interests lie. We were taken over by a hedge fund, and the hedge fund, you know, does anybody think a hedge fund is in the business of producing good news and quality news and informing the public, or are they interested in loading themselves up with debt and leveraging the debt and taking the assets, stripping the assets? And so, that's one of the things that's been kind of disheartening as an industry. The industry is to just see how decimated it's become, and even the white knights like Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post or Patrick at the LA Times, who were going to be these wealthy guys who kind of had it as a vanity project, are now turning their backs on this. So the public is the loser, and the public increasingly is getting their views confirmed versus trying to get independent news. And there's just kind of a jaded idea that, oh, the Washington Post is biased, the New York Times is biased. Well, no, they're not biased. They have the most talented reporters in the country and the best writers in the country.
Hmm.
You may not like the angle they took on a story. That doesn't mean that's made up. Make your own mind up. Read a lot, right? So um,
Yeah.
it's not a happy time for the industry. I wouldn't tell my own kids to join this profession, and it will exist in some way, shape, or form. I don't think it's going to go away, but I think it's in a period of severe transition, like it was when radio became TV. And it's people still need to be informed, and they need verifiable, reliable sources of information.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, uh, they're harder to find, and thankfully, podcasts like yours are making a difference where people, it's the plus side of like-minded news and information.
Hmm.
You can go if you want to be informed, to go get informed, not necessarily
Hmm.
to have your views confirmed, but to learn about something you didn't know. And the podcasting space has been tremendous. Whether it's crime podcasts, I have to confess, through my wife, I've become an addict of something called the Crime Junkies. So anytime I travel, I spend 8 hours listening to Crime Junkies shows.
Okay.
Really good podcast, you know,
Yeah.
unsolved murders and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
there are so many ranges of podcasts that are so good.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Kevin, before we get to the last question. So in today's climate, um, there are a lot of people who are considering leaving this country. And you spoke about it. You said, there's crime everywhere. And whatever's going on with you, wherever you go, there you are. But give me an idea. Um, if we looked at this world globally, what are some of the countries that you think would be a good place for people to think about maybe relocating to, if it's on their mind?
Sorry,
I'm asking for a friend.
just have uh, yeah. The question is, will they take Americans?
That's
So
true too.
yeah, so the yeah, so I think realistically, if you're a retiree and you're looking to retire, certainly places like Portugal and Spain are value places that are interesting. But I do think, you know, I would hope people would think it's worth staying and fighting because, you do have a say in these things. And if you
Mhm.
don't, you know, choosing to not take a stand is taking a stand. And I think
Mhm.
too many people have laid down so much. And you think to what's going on with the DEI stuff now, and think of all the sacrifice that people made, the Kings and the John. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many, Andrew Young, so many people who suffered to put the building blocks in place. Um,
Mhm.
and to just see that kind of, just lock, stock, and barrel go away. I think people need to stand up and put a foot down, and it starts by getting organized, by tackling things one at a time in your own community, and trying to understand where we are, right, as a country. So if you really analyze it, this really kind of breaks down to a rural urban breakdown is really what it is,
Mhm.
right? And that's not new in our country. I used to cover the Congress for years. Well, the whole funding debate is always over. Do you fund, metros, or do you fund highways, cities versus counties and states? It's an old debate. It's not new. What's new is the social media component, the ability to be, 24/7, and frankly, the fact that it's okay to just outright lie. That
Mhm.
people used to exaggerate and inflate, conflate, and now it's just an outright lie. Or you can do things like Mike Lee of Utah after lawmakers were killed in Minnesota to make jokes about it online. I mean, what kind of person are you that you
Mhm.
don't have a sense of, it's not a RD thing, it's decency. What has
Mhm.
happened to common decency? And that's where people need to find common ground and find ways to unite and get together and step up against this stuff, because it's really understanding. Okay, so you Republicans want to keep guns. Democrats say, well, Democrats are in cities where guns are a problem. Guns aren't so much a problem if you're out in Montana or Wyoming. Okay, that's not that hard to figure out. Okay, so what can we do together to kind of address both of our problems and each have our own freedoms? These aren't intractable, hard to solve issues. Most of these are actually pretty easy to solve if there's willingness. And the key thing is there are people outside forces that are dividing us now in a way that has never happened to this extent. I mean, in the days of the Cold War, the Soviets would paint swastikas on Jewish cemeteries or would write KKK in black neighborhoods. That's common history. People who did that have come forward and said, yeah, we did that during the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
Now, you do that today and look at online and you look at all the disinformation. And for instance, the Caitlin Clark stuff and the degree to which that has become a huge racial divide issue, or Coco Gauff and Sabalenka, and suddenly that's everywhere on your Facebook feed. Who's pushing that,
Mhm.
right? I don't think people are pushing that because they think they're making money. People aren't making money off those things. They're doing that to divide us. Who's doing it and why?
Mhm.
That's what people need to be asking themselves and pushing back, and then pressuring the social media firms, do something about this, right now.
Not to mention AI. How
Well, that's,
you
yeah, that's the other big thing when you're not going to be able to tell, like I'm sure you get this on your Facebook feed. They'll have so and so crying as they donate something, or a quarter, Lamar Jackson
Mhm.
donates. All of this is made up AI
Mhm.
imaging and stuff, and it's kind of a trial run to see how far you can push this, how far you can go on that. But yeah, it's kind of strange. I was telling somebody today that I was on a power walk, an exercise walk, and I just recently got a pair of Meta glasses, that you can hear talk through your glasses or take pictures with your glasses. You can guess why I might want to have something like that. But so I'm on a walk, and suddenly my phone tells me, the woman, kind of a sultry woman's voice says, "Hey, how's it going?"
Whoa.
Like, what? it was my phone trying to chat me up. It was like, what? And then you can let your mind wander and think where we're going to be 10 years from now when our
Mm-hmm.
phone replaces our
Mm-hmm.
human relationships. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's very strange, very strange.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we have to kind of rediscover our humanity in so many
Yeah.
ways, and particularly to answer your question, uh, don't go overseas, stay here, make a difference
I
because
appreciate that. I appreciate that. I appreciate your input and your perspective as well. I was looking at one of the places on my bucket list was to get over to Spain, and like Barcelona is on there. And then I was seeing something on social media about how the tourism is so out of control over there. You had like the locals out there like shooting water guns at
yep, yep,
at
and
tourists. I was like,
going on in
whoa.
France as well. Well, one of the
Yeah.
dynamics, which is a dynamic here with our divide and in Europe as well, is we're both aging populations, right? The baby boomers here, 75 million people born between 1946 and 1964, they're all hitting retirement in a way. So it's hitting the medical system in a way like no one, well, everybody expected this. Everybody said this was going to happen. It's now here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big factor in politics. What is Trump's age demographic for most of his voters, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's most of these these guys who remember what the 1950s or 60s were like, and we want to go back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a nostalgia vote in a certain way, and of course the rural versus urban. But so I do think that both in Europe and here, these aging populations kind of change the dynamics, and it's why you have like the southern part of Andalusia. I was in Andalusia last year, spending a week and a half traveling all over Andalusia in a RV, and mostly Germans, but everywhere you go are Germans and Brits who've got condos. And I was there 40 years ago. There were no tourists there. Now the tourists have rented out every part of Algeciras or you know, all these places. So it's changed their footprint because these are older people with money who are about to retire or have retired, and now they want to see the world. So it's not just tourism; it's older tourism.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting
Mm-hmm.
dynamic, I think. So
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. It's getting
but
ready to go off onto a different tangent, but that's all right.
choose something. If you got to go somewhere else, go warm. So
Yeah, absolutely. And near water, hopefully.
yeah.
Okay, so number six, final question. So your career is a testament to the power of truth and transparency in holding institutions accountable. In our world today, we often see efforts to suppress information, discredit facts, and silence critical narratives. From your unique global perspective as an investigative journalist, what do you see as the most significant threats to the pursuit of truth? And what role do you believe independent journalism plays in safeguarding a well informed society?
Well, independent journalism is key to that, but it needs people who want to be informed. That's a key component of that, and that's the changing variable here. But what worries me the most, and I don't think the average person knows this yet. So you've probably never heard of a company called Rumble. Have you heard of Rumble?
No.
Okay. Rumble is creating an alternative universe, an internet universe. They're basically creating a separate internet that is going to be a platform for a whole population of people. Think Trump through social X. That's all being set up in Macedonia, being built out by Rumble. It's a publicly traded company. It's in their prospectus. Anybody can go to the SEC and pull their
Hmm.
documents. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they call themselves a company that's creating infrastructures, a woke-free infrastructure. Or basically, what it's going to do is going to create a whole web internet platform outside the U.S. and Europe, Western Europe, that can live independently and it's an alternative reality. And look who's on that already. Glenn Greenwald, Dan Bongino is now the number 2 at the FBI. All these kind of hard right podcasters are all on this network. Well, Truth Social, which is the Trump family platform, has a revenue sharing arrangement with Rumble. So anytime you create some sort of conflict, cultural war issue, and then you play it up on your social media platform, and they're advertising off that, and they get eyeballs and it makes more advertising. Everybody's sharing in revenue. Basically, disinformation, hate, and dis, running at each other is profitable. And
Mm-hmm.
this internet space is creating a whole new parallel universe that's going to make this even harder to combat because it's going to be outside the view of U.S. regulators, U.S. courts. It's built up in Macedonia. So Rumble is, in my mind, is one of the biggest challenges because that's where you're going to have so much of the testing on AI, and um, we're going to live in parallel universes in the internet space. That's alternate is going to just as we're becoming further and further apart in our personal space, our internet space is going to become two very distinct realities as well. And that to me is deeply troubling because and that in crypto because at the end of the day, uh, there's a lot of money pouring into crypto and no one's quite sure what it is, right? Whereas it's taken productive money away from productive companies or investments. And when you invest in Wall Street, you're investing in a company. You're giving it capital to develop itself further, which creates employment. There's links to all these things. Cryptocurrency is none of that, and it's not anchored in anything. There's no reason why crypto is worth this today and that tomorrow. It's not anchored in anything. You don't know who the market movers are, who are creating the changes in value. It's a complete fantasy that's going to end poorly. They call it destructured finance, or uh, you know for the life of me, and I think I'm a fairly smart guy and I think about these things. I can't understand other than it's another way of betting on movement of price and making money. That I
Mm-hmm.
can understand, but there are better ways to do that and more productive ways to use your capital for society.
Mm-hmm.
Where those two things I think are, I'm sorry, this is getting really wonky and in the weeds, but those are two things that I think really are are going to challenge our lives in ways we don't understand. The US dollar has been the anchor currency for the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what gives us our strength and our economy the strength. Crypto threatens that, and if it's replaced as a global currency with some sort of tether, Bitcoin, some digital stable coin, suddenly the emperor has no clothes. You don't have the dollar as the preeminent currency in the world. What do you have?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think there's a lot of stuff happening that even the press, I don't want to say the press isn't covered, it's being covered, but it's being covered by an industry that's decimated. It's losing people every day, and then is trying to tread water with all the many things happening that it's not getting the kind of attention that it deserves. And I think by the time we wake up and realize it, it may be a little bit late. We'll have to revisit this in 5 years and see.
Okay. So
Or,
Kevin, what gives you hope and what brings you joy? Let's end that way.
Uh, the second one is the easier. Family and music would be the joy
Mm-hmm.
factor, and life. Waking up every day. Once you get over 60, and all your friends start having issues, and you start having issues every day, you certainly realize that every day is not guaranteed. So, uh, having an attitude of getting up every day with knowing how blessed you are, then you're not
Yeah.
living on $1 a day, for
Yeah.
instance. So that was the joy. What was the first part of that? What
What gives you hope?
hope? Um, there's not a lot that gives me hope, other than I think you just have to have it. Otherwise, life's too dismal. You just have
Yeah.
to believe that you have to want something better, and you have to be around people who want something better, and collectively you work to make it better. And
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean you have to be an activist marching in the streets. There are all kinds of ways you can make a difference, but you know ultimately it's pretty simple. Be kind and be helpful and
Yeah.
think of others. And if you do all that, then everything else kind of follows, right? And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's what we're losing as a society when you can, you know, joke within an hour, make a joke about a dead politician, and you're a politician yourself.
Hmm.
That's what's wrong with this country, and that's what we need to
Yeah.
change one by
Yeah.
one. It starts with every individual.
Well, I so appreciate you taking this time to sit down with me and just have an authentic conversation. That's all I wanted, and you came through with it, and I appreciate it. And I know that you're around some dark stuff, even darker than I had anticipated, but I can tell just by your aura that, you're navigating through it and you're staying true to yourself and, and who you are. And you're making a positive impact. And I appreciate you for that, my friend,
You
my
have to. I
good
believe
friend.
in the words of Bruce Springsteen, at the end of every hard-earned day, people find some reason to believe, and you have to
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
believe in something bigger than you,
Yeah.
better, and in the words of Melania, be better every day. Try to better yourself and better those around you, and
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
You want to take care of your space, and starts with each of us.
Okay, well, let's revisit. Like I said, I had a whole lot of other things that I wanted to talk about, but this was a great, great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And so to the listeners, um, we're going to bid you adieu until the next episode. And thanks for tuning in and have a good night. Thank you, Kevin.